Hello everyone, and welcome to another video. It's certainly been a while, but yeah, I felt like making some more YouTube, so here we go. So I dug through some of my old footage, and this is from a Twitch stream I did a while ago, and it's basically the entirety of the process for laying down transfers properly so that they look good without the silvering that usually happens when you don't dress them properly. So I'll talk you through exactly what I did to get this result. Alright, so before I began, I obviously prepared everything. I've got all of my models laid out ahead in front of me, including the necessary things I'll need, the pallet of clean water, my knife for cutting out the transfers, and the microset and microsol. You can see the bottles up in the top right corner of the video. You can see I've clearly labelled them 1 and 2 to indicate which one should be used first and second. So to start with, I'll begin just doing some cleanup on the models, and this basically means dusting. As I'd previously, I should also mention, but the very first step after I laid down the base coats and the first initial dry brush, the first dry brush for the hull was I laid down a layer of, I believe it's, basically floor polish. The Americans listening, this would be Future Floor Shine. But I have a unique brand in Australia that works just as well. So due to having trouble sourcing the transfers early on, I had to basically get this project up to that point, then leave it for a long while. So of course it gathered a bit of dust sitting on my desk, so here I go, basically just cleaning it off to make sure we've got a nice completely clean surface to work with before we actually hit the transfers. Now this is important, otherwise, you know, dust and hairs get in the way, especially if you haven't been particularly disciplined with where you do your flocking. So with the models cleaned and ready to go, we'll start by freeing some of our transfers from the sheet. So usually I do it a couple at a time to avoid misplacing transfers and to avoid getting a backlog float happening, because if you leave a bunch of transfers floating in the water, odds are they'll separate from the paper completely and you'll have to wheedle them back on with a toothpick, and it's not fun to do. So here I am just figuring out which set of transfers belongs with each model, and once I've more or less got that sorted, I'll proceed. So once you're good to go, place your transfers in the water, make sure they're immersed, and give them about a minute to 30 seconds to fully separate, for the glue to loosen up, basically. You can see what I'm doing there is I'm getting some toothpicks ready to act as my manipulators for the transfer. Of course, what you see in that there is just me looking at my reference to make sure I get the locations right. Again, just let me emphasize, you should check your references before you start. This is to make absolutely sure that you don't misapply any transfers and do something stupid like, say, get the roundels on upside down, like I've done in the past. Alright, and now on to the miracle product. So the two you're seeing here is microset and microsol. So to briefly describe what they do, microset is the liquid used to prepare a surface for the decal going down. Microsol is what you use to treat the decal once it is down on the surface. Now, most scale and modelers believe that the first one is unnecessary, and I'm increasingly inclined to agree that you should just prepare the surface with water and it's just as effective. But I will say that the second mixture is absolutely vital. What that one does is it softens the decal as it settles on the model, allowing it to sort of like wrap around detail. This is excellent for getting things on like military style scale models, especially things with lots of rivets and the like. So yeah, these steps are actually pretty simple. All you need to do is first of all prepare the surface by putting on some of the first mixture, and then once the transfer is down, make sure it's situated properly, sop up the rest of the initial setting mixture, and then you give it a thin coat of the secondary mixture. So here I am currently just preparing all of the sites on the model to receive their transfers. So once the transfers are freely flowing from the paper, God, say that 3 times really fast, I typically use a small brush to pick them up. Some people use a pair of tweezers to pick up the paper itself, then use a brush to slide the paper from the slide the transfer from the paper directly onto the model, but I find that a brush works just as well. But I have been doing this for a while, so probably best stick to the orthodoxy and use a pair of tweezers. So I put the transfer on initially. You also use the brush to soak up a little bit of the excess micro set early on, and then I'm using a combination of the brush and a toothpick to align the transfer to exactly the right spot that I'm after. So we've let the micro set dry a bit on the models, so our transfers should be more or less in their final position. What we're going to do now is just apply a very thin coat of micro sol over each of the transfers. And we're going to be careful not to put so much on that we accidentally flood the transfer and cause it to basically move off our final position. So you want to generally treat this as like almost layering. You'd want to do a thin coat, let it dry for a bit, and then come back and hit it again. And you keep doing this until a transfer has fully conformed with the surface of the model. So I've already went ahead and prepared the top of these tanks with some micro set, and you can see I'm not being too, well, I'm just positioning it where it should be, where the Allied Star should go historically. I'm not worrying too much about the detail because, like I mentioned before, the micro sol will melt that decal and cause it to form neatly around the rivets and other parts of the top of the turret. Again, once the transfers are down and in place, hit everything with just a small coat of micro sol and then let it go. And then keep on repeating that process until you are happy with how the transfer has settled. So that's the basic steps for how to dress a transfer properly. So let's go ahead and do the rest of these armoured vehicles. Once you've finished with laying down the transfers, you'll want to seal them in with another layer of the gloss varnish, whatever one you used. And then you want to kill that gloss with a layer of matte varnish at the end. Then after that you can pretty much continue painting by adding on some, say, additional dry brush highlighting or additional weathering. While you are running against the time it takes for the microset to dry, I definitely wouldn't recommend rushing it. You can always apply more microset later on. Very small transfers on very small places can be challenging, like this serial number. Well, you can see to do so I was particularly careful, used my tweezers to transfer across, and to finally situate it in its final position. Generally, when doing this for scale models and to an extent wargaming, you will want to do the transfers about second to last, immediately after the majority of the main paint job, including some highlighting, and immediately before battle damage. Though sometimes you can mix it up and do some final highlights after the fact. You just have to be careful. Transfers work well when you productionize how you apply them. As I work through these particular tanks, I usually have the transfers for the next set already in the process of softening while I finalize the position for the one I'm currently working on. This way I'm able to keep moving at a half-decent clip. You can see here I'm dealing with a bit of a damage to the transfer. Sometimes the micro sole can soften them to the point where they start to come apart. If this happens, don't worry about it. You can fake it as battle damage or move the offending piece back into place. So as you can see here, we're just wrapping everything up, just applying the last layers of microsole, and we're just about done. What we'll do after this is reseal these transfers in by applying another layer of the floor polish to seal them in, and that's pretty much it. See you on the next video. Bye.